Evolutionary podcast 581. What steroids do you dislike? This is going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about. A couple of you have messaged us. You're like, you're always talking about these steroids and all this stuff. Why don't you talk about do an episode on ones you don't like? And you can come. So let me just start out by saying this. I'm going to bring in Monster early on this, but let me just start out saying this. Look, we're all different. We all have different goals. We're all going to have different experiences. Just because Mobster and I might dislike a certain steroid doesn't mean that you're not going to like it. And vice versa. You might dislike a steroid, and Mobster and I might like it. So let's really get off our high horse on this one. And some people are like that for some reason in life. They're like, you got to buy this car. And then the person will buy a different car. And they'll be like, why didn't you listen to me? It's like, dude, this person might want this type of car. That person might want that type of car. Doesn't make them right or wrong. Doesn't make you right or wrong. Everyone has different goals when it comes to this. So we're gonna like different things. So I've got a handful of steroids I'm gonna talk about and explain why I dislike them. And then I'm gonna bring in Mobster right now to start us off on this show.
I agree with Steve, what Steve just said. And without naming a particular steroid, I'm going to say that, and Steve knows which one it is because it's bound to be on the list. What terrible side effects we've discussed for this particular steroid is for some people is literally what I've just said. They can't handle the side effects, Steve. And yet others, they like how that feels. And they like how it feels because it literally feels to them like something's fucking happening. It literally feels, listen, my body feels crazy. So I know there's something going on. I know that I'm going to kill it in the gym. It doesn't matter how toxic or sweaty or whatever they feel. So Steve's right. And then even stuff, look, the individuality thing that Steve discussed, if I'm 25% or 30% body fat and you're 10% body fat and we take the self same dose, trust me, so the 25 or 30% body fat person is going to struggle by comparison. So like Steve says, the individual response is there. I've always done well on low dosages. There are smaller athletes at my local gym, I know would be a great example of this. And we know someone else on the forums exactly like this, very similar physiques when they're in competition shape, and they take a shed load. I could not handle what they do. That is literally the individual response. So, Steve, come back in with a couple of yours, and then we'll discuss why.
Yeah, if my cat would let me after jumping on here. My cat wants attention right now. But listen, at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to go with Super Droll as my number one dislike steroid. I just think it's a shitty steroid. Here's the thing: like when you use Super Droll, you're gonna have like crazy strength increases, like within a week and a half on it. Your strength is gonna go sky high, and but you're gonna feel like shit. Like it's just a nonstop fatigue feeling. It feels like you basically have the flu, like nonstop. It's horrible. And you're not gonna sleep good on it. You're not gonna have a good appetite on it. You're just not gonna wanna like do cardio. It kills your body and it speeds up your heart rate and it inflames all your organs. It's just a nasty, nasty steroid. And I'm gonna tell you something. I ran like 20 to 30 milligrams. I ran this stuff a couple times. I ran Super Droll a couple times. I would run it 20 to 30 milligrams. I might do 40 milligrams on a heavy day. If I was doing a heavy leg day or heavy chest day or something, I'd throw in an extra 10 milligrams in there. So I found the difference between 20 to 30 to 40 being huge. Like it was unbearable. 40 milligrams was unbearable. 30 milligrams was unbearable up to 80%. And then 20 milligrams was like unbearable up to 60%. But it was like you feel like death on Super Droll. And the amount of damage that you're doing to your body when you're running Super Droll is just nasty. So I ran it twice. I don't think I was able to get much further than 3 weeks on it, Mobster. Before I was like, I can't take this shit anymore. I just feel like crap on it. Like fatigue, no energy, just dragging. And I hate that. So that's what I'm gonna have to say. But listen, the results are fucking amazing. Like I was stuck. I remember I was stuck on a plateau on my bench press. Like I was stuck there for months, and I never thought I'd break through that plateau. And I literally went on Superdrol, and like 2 weeks later, I like smashed through that plateau. Like it was like nothing. So it's like this stuff works amazingly well, but I'll never touch that stuff again. It is just too damn toxic. I hate it. How about you, Monster? Yeah, go ahead.
I actually added Superdrol just before we started the podcast, and the reason for that was, and I've stated this on other shows, when Superdrol become available to the market as a legal, Steve, over the counter quote unquote pro hormone, which it isn't, it's on a steroid. The issue for me wasn't so much the side effects, although even back then, Steve, they were kind of well known. So you was rolling the dice when you did the things and took Superdrol. The issue for me was a lot of individuals, because it was over the counter, treated it as safe and treated it as a pro hormone and not as a steroid it actually was. So they kind of almost in a perverse way, and without meaning to sound unkind, they made a rod for their own back, Steve, by treating it as something else other than what it was, and therefore almost asked for the side effects. So on my list, and these are much the harsher steroids, and ironically, Steve, I've actually tried all three, but on my list of one of the drugs I wrote, that was Halo or Halo testing. Now, the reason for this is thus it forced, and I've actually tried it and didn't get much from it. But back in the day, again, especially for powerlifters, this drug was amazing for making you aggressive and really, really. This is when you used to see the guys headbutting the bar, Steve, and kind of all, getting nosebleeds and all this kind of fucked up shit. Now that still happens, but a lot less frequent than it used to be. We didn't have social media, we didn't have mobile phones, and yet these videos still made their way onto the internet via YouTube and documentaries and whatever else. And Halo was the one that was out there. You didn't run it for long periods of time, but it kind of made you edgy and aggressive. And that's the other two drugs I've actually got on my list that are very similar in terms of how you feel, which is kind of toxic. But did it make you stronger for powerlifting? 100% you got stronger, no doubt about it. The issue is, of course, running it too long. Any of the drugs that I've written down, Steve, that work for powerlifting, work for strength, make you kind of crazy and fucked up. You should not run them for longer periods of time. And the problem occasionally with the internet, with social media, with even podcasts, is that people are out there going, if it makes me stronger in 2 weeks, I want to run it for 4 weeks and for 6 weeks. And what I did like when I first started researching stories, I would see, and again, all of these drugs, but specifically two of them for strength, Steve, what I did see sensibly at that time was that the experts that were using them to get crazy strong in their peak weeks for powerlifting weren't suggesting that you run these drugs for long periods of time. So the issue is thus: A, you're going to feel like shit, but crazy, crazy strong. And B, run them for short periods of time. Halo testing for sure, Steve. I'll throw in another one, and I've actually used this, but literally just for the day of a competition. And I think it's one of, if not one of the top three, and I'm talking about every steroid that's ever existed. I think there's only two more that are arguably worse if you were to take them for more than 2 weeks. The next check drops. I can't remember. Is it Mirillabone, Steve's the proper technical name? Absolutely do not run this unless you're powerlifting or doing strength type stuff that I was. And Steve, I would run and this is how crazy potent this stuff is, micrograms. It's 200 micrograms, so 1/5 of a milligram on the day of a competition, lasts for about 8 hours. Again, the few bits of research I found recommended you never use this for more than 2 weeks. And trust me, was I aggressive? Certainly the first time I used it, Steve, there exists possibly on an old cell phone somewhere a video of me running up and down and effing and CUNTing and God knows what else for about a minute after making a lift. And that was pure check drops, pure out and out aggression. And I liked that, which is great for the day of a competition only. Can you imagine, Steve, if people talk about how they feel on trend, and that's the other one, running around and how they're chasing after skirt all the time, they're looking at women when they should be, you've called trend a relationship breaker. Can you imagine what you'd be like in terms of your wanting possibly to fight or that sort of aggression. I had it literally, and this is the way that I used it, for one day of a competition. In terms of toxicity, like I said, it's possibly the third most toxic steroid you can possibly take. No recommendations over 2 weeks. And I would not want to think about how bad I would feel if I was running this as an actual cycle. The damage that I'd be doing, and possibly, as I've implied, the bloody aggravation I'd be getting, arguing with people in supermarkets, arguing when you're parking your car, all that kind of fucked up shit. It's deliberately used by strength athletes like myself for that peak level of strength one day of competition when you almost want that level of aggression. But do I want to be like that all the time in my life? Absolutely not, Steve. Talk about trend, because I know that we've both got experience, but you've got a little bit more experience in terms of it's great, but it's also you've got to be really, really careful in terms of we like it, but we dislike it. I think you've discussed getting shoulder injuries because you got so strong on it, but likes it at the same time for how strong you did get.
Yeah, and look, I'm not gonna, say I dislike trend, but I dislike certain things about trend. And one of the things I disliked on it was just feeling like you have a fever, like 24/7 on it, and I can't stand that feeling. And it sucks. You're always thirsty on it. Like it's like you can't drink enough on it. You can't hydrate. You never feel hydrated on it, and it's like it absolutely destroys your cardio. If you have an active lifestyle, it's absolutely brutal on your cardio. And I don't know, man. It just doesn't make any sense for me based on my lifestyle. But I've run it previously back when I did a lot of powerlifting, back when I was bulking and stuff, and it's a tremendous steroid for that. But I mean, it's a horrible steroid if you like to do a lot of activities and you like to do a lot of outdoor stuff. It can really, really screw you up. And look, if you get on this stuff, like I went one time and I was deep into my trend cycle, and I went deep sea fishing, and I got seasick, as did most of the boat. It was pretty rough out there, and we were about 13 miles offshore, and it's an 8-hour fishing trip. So I spent 7 hours of that having both diarrhea and throwing up, and my pee was brown. Okay, literally, I could have died. I could have literally died from like liver failure or kidney failure. That's how bad it was at that point. So never, ever, ever, if you're on trend, do anything like that. That's going to trigger anything. I wouldn't go traveling to another country or traveling on a plane or anything. It would the risk of you getting, let's say you went on a plane, you took an 8-hour flight on a plane, you got seasick, you got air sick, and you're throwing up. Even just throwing up once while you're on trend can be dangerous because you're already dehydrated when you're on trend. And by throwing up, now you're even more dehydrated. If you have diarrhea or anything like that, that causes dehydration, it can really get dangerous. So you got to really be careful on trend. You got to basically walk on eggshells when you're using trend. And you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're going to be that miserable. And that was a miserable experience that I went through. And it ruined my entire fishing trip, all because of trend. I blame trend for that 100%. And it messes with your gut. It causes a lot of people have issues with trend because it causes gut problems. And it's not your imagination. It does. It's so inflammatory in the body that it causes problems with that. So Mobster touched on that, and I'm going to get into my next one that I dislike.
Yeah, I mean, look, Steve, as I said, I recently used the trend as part of my kiting stack, and it was absolutely effective. But the stack I did straight afterwards, as some of you listeners will know from the forums, the bulk one, and I'm going to touch on this now, Steve, um, was the highest amount I've used of two drugs that I absolutely love. But the problem was the amount. So, for example, and I've made a note here, Steve, literally sometimes the dose is the difference between having a great response physically in terms of you're strong as hell, you put on pounds of muscle, etc., but you feel toxic as fuck. And just do 200 or 300 milligrams a week less, you're still getting great results, but you feel better. Let me give you an example of that, right? So it's one of those stupid gym stories that you hear, Steve. And I was there when the person was being pointed at in the gym. So there are young persons coming to the gym, in my opinion, almost certainly under the age of 25. So too young really to be using anything. And the gym owner says he's just putting 4 mil, so anywhere between 800 and 1200 milligrams of whatever testosterone it was into his quad. And the next time I see the gym owner, he says, guess what? He hasn't been back. So literally just putting 4 mil of fluid in would have been, as we say, metaphorically and literally a pain in the ass. And the fact of the matter was, he must have put somewhere between 800 and 1200, as I just said, milligrams in. Now, if that's your first ever jab and you've got zero experience, no idea how you respond, Steve, it's going to be almost like a kind of shock to your body. Not only the 4 mil of fluid sitting in your quad somewhere, but how you've got no idea how your body's going to respond. You would have been better off with one. So sometimes, guys, it isn't even the steroid itself. It is literally how goddamn much you've put in one go, or how goddamn much you're putting in over the week. So sometimes it is literally, and when we discuss this on show, Steve, when we try to get our heads round how much drugs have been found in a dead bodybuilder system, George Peterson being the obvious example with EQ 2000 milligrams or something, and that was in the blood test after he died. The one with the Dallas McCarver death attack, Steve, when he says, I just can't imagine the sheer amount that he was having a pin every single week in order to be where he was. Sometimes it is just the volume of fluid and the sheer volume of milligrams that you guys are considering putting into your system. It is a lot easier to love a PED if you're only using 300, 400, 500, 600 milligrams a week. But you will hate sometimes how you feel on 1,000, 11, 1,200 milligrams. So sometimes it is just that sheer volume and doubling your dosages. Guys, we see this a lot. If I take X and X may be put on £5, and if I take 2 times X, I'll put on £10. You might, but you probably won't. But you're almost certainly going to get 2 times the side effects. So a drug can go from one of your favorites, PEDs ever, and the response was amazing, to your shit list really, really quickly, just based on the much higher dosages than you're used to, and the side effects are doubled up, and now it's a 24-hour a day thing of feeling like shit and not sleeping and whatever else. Guys, and I will touch on this lastly if I bring you back in, sometimes just at a great stack adds so much muscle to you that you end up struggling with sleeping, or as Steve said, digesting food and whatever else. And that turns a perfectly successful cycle. You've put on 10 pounds of muscle into hell, not because the toxic feeling from the PEDs. No, you feel great. There's no problems, no pip, no night sweats, no whatever. It's just the fact that you've added so much muscle and has such a successful cycle that your body is struggling to compensate with the 10 pounds, or struggling to compensate for the crazy stuff you're doing down the gym. And then that makes the cycle harder to get through. What do you think, Steve, if you've got any more as well?
So the next one I'm going to talk about that I dislike is Winstrol. And look, Winstrol at the end of the day, it's a great steroid. Pro bodybuilders, mobster, who are cutting into their contests, physique competitors, they love Winstrol. It's an amazing steroid for cutting down. If you want to get ripped, if you want to get rid of if you want to strip your body of the water weight and have no water in those muscles and have it be just rock hard and vascular, great option. But I don't fucking like Winstrol, and I'll tell you why. Number one, I never get headaches. Winstrol gave me headaches. Number two, I never have joint problems. Winstrol gave me joint problems. Number three, I never lose my head hair. Winstrol caused my head hair to come out like crazy. Number four, I never have prostate issues. Winstrol caused me to have prostate issues. So it's the most, I would say it's the most side effect steroid that people don't think has side effects. And the reason people don't have side effects is back when they were doing these side effect charts, all right, on these anabolic steroids, they'd have Winstrol be lower on the list, and it'd be like a rank of 4 or 5 or 6, whatever, 7, 8, whatever it happened to be, depending on which one you're looking at. Because back in those days, those charts are parroted. And they've been parroted over the course of decades. And the reason they had Winstrol listed as not having side effects is because it did not aromatize into estrogen, which is true. It doesn't. So you don't have to worry about estrogenic side effects on Winstrol, but you do have to worry about the DHT side effects, and you do have to worry about the androgenic side effects with Winstrol. So it comes with a lot of side effects, and those DHT side effects are very, very, very strong. All right. And so you have to realize that going into it. And a lot of the old timers, mobster back in your day, they'd be like, well, Winstrol doesn't have side effects. Well, why doesn't it have side effects? Oh, well, it didn't give me bitch tits. It doesn't give me water retention. Well, yeah, no shit, because it doesn't aromatize into estrogen. But that doesn't mean a steroid doesn't still come with side effects just because it doesn't do that. Tren doesn't aromatize into estrogen, but it still causes a shitload of side effects. Superdrol doesn't aromatize into estrogen, but it still causes a shit ton of side effects. So I would say that's a misconception about Winstrol mobster, and that's why I hate that fucking steroid. I won't run it again. No, I like just the hair and the joint reasons alone are reasons I don't want that shit again, because I can't stand working out and doing an arm curl and feeling my elbows being dry. I don't agree with that. Same thing with squats. I'm not going to dry out my knees and dry out my hips when I'm doing squats. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. It's dangerous. It can lead to major problems when you don't have lubricated joints, and it's just not a good idea.
I want to jump back in here, Steve. And the reasons why I dislike these drugs is not actually for the side effects, perversely, right? And in a couple of examples that I'm about to give, buddies of mine have used the exact same PED and loved it, and I didn't. So I said, why do I dislike these ones? Because time and effort, Steve. Testing amphate did nothing for me. And if I'm spending the same amount of money as my buddies are, and if I'm spending the same amount of time in the gym training and putting in effort and whatever else, and I'm not getting a fucking response because for whatever reason it just doesn't suit my setup, and I just literally, oh, this is great. My strength's going for the roof. Nice for you, motherfucker. But what about me? Nothing's happening. I'm using the same dose, the same product, the same source. I got nothing for it. So I put down Halo again, Steve, because I've used Halo. And funny enough, I was using it for strength competition. I was expecting and looking forward to the level of aggression. Nothing. And the last one on that list where it didn't seem to have any effect for me, but it might have done when I was younger, but obviously it hadn't at this particular point in my career and my time of lifting weights, was Anadrol. And Anadrol for some people is absolutely amazing. Halo testing for some people is absolutely amazing. And testing that for my buddies was great. But for me, it was nothing. So there's that. And possibly, Steve, when the drugs you're using are underdosed. Think of the time that you spend in the gym. Think of how long you did research before you decided to take PEDs and all the kind of stuff that you're supposed to do, like we advised on this podcast. And you're in the gym absolutely trying to kill it, Steve, and you're out several hundreds of dollars and nothing fucking happens. So why it's definitely on my I hate them then, because even when they've been legit and nothing's happened, that's time, energy, and definitely money wasted for me. So those three, for that reason alone, would be on that list. Not necessarily for the side effects, because I didn't feel anything from them. Didn't seem to have any effects. So definitely wasn't feeling any side effects. And yet, again, as saying, the testing amphate is a great example. My buddies absolutely loved it. They said, combination what they were doing, that they saw strength increases at the gym. I was there. I saw them physically say this is great and so on and so forth, but it did nothing for me. Do you have anything like that, Steve, where you absolutely trusted the source and just didn't feel that the steroid was working for you?
I not really. I think maybe Halo. Yeah, same thing with Halo as your experience. I didn't think it was that great compared to some of these other steroids that I've done. I mean, Trend to me blew it away, and Superdrol blew it away when it came to strength. So, but I could see where you're coming from too. I think Primo, was underwhelming for me, but some people loved it. It didn't really to me it didn't justify the cost, so I'd go with Primo as well. Um, but I'm gonna add one more before we finish up, and that this isn't an anabolic steroid, but it's used a lot, and that's clenbuterol. And I think clenbuterol is one I dislike. So I've run clenbuterol twice, and I gave it a shot. Each time I ran it, I said I'm never running this shit again. So absolutely miserable on it. Felt like I was gonna die from the heartburn on this stuff. I get heartburn like every evening, and I never get heartburn. This stuff gave me heartburn. It absolutely murdered my cardio. Like I wasn't able to do cardio on this stuff. I didn't like the way it made me jittery. It made my hands like tremble. So I think it's a miserable, miserable drug. And I think 80 or 90% of you who use Clen would agree. But there is that 10 or 15% of you that like, oh yeah, I love Clen. I get really good results on Clen. But for me, it's just a miserable. I'd rather fast for 10 days. Just do a fucking water fast for 10 days than run Clen, and be miserable on it the whole time. I'd rather go run like 10 miles a day, mobster, and go through, running like that than run Clen. There's just so many better ways to lose weight than using Clen. It's just a miserable, miserable drug. And it was never designed for fat loss or anything like that. It's just been one of those drugs that people started using, and I just think I think it's trash, and more people are not using it. But like I said, there's a small percentage of you who will get good results on Clen. But I not only didn't get any results on Clen, it also just made me miserable and just killed my cardio and killed my heart health in the process.
Let
So
me jump
Mobster,
in here,
yeah, yeah.
Steve. I've got one more, but I'm going to comment on the Clen as well, right? And I've actually said this on other shows and on the forums. So, seeing young ladies, plump young ladies, come to the gym and they haven't got enough time, which is a huge mistake, guys and girls. 6 weeks for a wedding, 6 weeks for a holiday. Motherfuckers, you should have been You should have been doing your diet in January, ready for the summer. So, 100% agree with Steve. Clen has been the quote unquote miracle cure. It's going to shift the fat. Da 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 da. They go home, they take it, they listen, they even do the right doses and everything else, and they're sitting on the sofa with the symptoms or the sensation of anxiety, and they don't realize that any drug that shifts the fat off you in that particular way is going to have an effect on your sense of well-being to the point where you are going to feel uncomfortable just sitting there doing nothing. And as you were talking, Steve, the other drug, which funny enough, neither of us mentioned till now, and it's only because you talked about it, Glenn, I was reminded, and it's a no-no on our forums, which would be DNP, Steve. It's right up there with Clen, except I think Clen's less likely to fucking kill you and fuck you up. So I'm just going to quote a couple of horror stories, and then very quickly the sort of way that you're going to feel on DNP. So horror stories are, and it's typical thinking of someone who's probably not even that overweight in a couple of examples I'm thinking of, Steve, where they've gone double the dose. There's a certain quote unquote safe level per milligram, which I'm not going to talk about on the show because I think it's a shit drug. And people will double that without realizing just how fucked up it does crazy, stupid things to your body, and how the reason that DMP was discovered as a quote unquote fat burning drug back in the day, and so on and so forth. Literally autopsies on people that were breathing it in at the factory where the product was being used in the manufacturing process for TNT, and they were dying, and the autopsies would cut them open and find out what looked like cooked meat inside their bodies. They weren't consuming it as we do for performance enhancement purposes, for fat burning purposes. They were just breathing in the fucking fumes, Steve. So DMP again, sitting there, and the sweat that's coming out of you's got a color to it. Having to have jugs of ice water by your body. And the thing that makes this most ridiculous, above and beyond almost the danger and the side effects, is that pretty much all the examples I've seen, Steve, they go, oh, I have a great results. I've used this amount of milligrams. The fat just fell off me. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. And then within weeks, they've put the fat back on. The body's kind of reset itself. And a lot of examples, Steve, as I know that you know, because we've had this conversation, they actually put on more fat. The body's overcompensated for the stimulus that you had from the DNP. So let's say that they lost 20 pounds, they put it back on a few weeks after finishing the cycle, 25 fucking pounds. they end up in a worse state than they was before. They look chiseled for 5 minutes, a few weeks. It is just we there are a few drugs in DNP is one of those that we just don't discuss on the forums. And DNP is above and beyond Clen for that particular one. Clen for me is absolutely, like Steve said, if you're not used to it, if you get the dose even a tiny bit wrong, but especially when you're not used to it and you're expecting a quote unquote, it's just any drug that knocks the fat off you properly is going to kind of fuck you up. And a lot of people are out there thinking it's some kind of easy to take miracle cure for getting rid of fat, and then they don't realize sitting there on the sofa watching the TV, hitting Netflix, that they're going to feel like shit from taking it at the wrong time of day, so they can't sleep, to just fidgeting and feeling anxious. So some of you would have run clean and done incredibly well. If your diet at some point and your training at some point is going to be even more successful. And that is another mistake that some of the users that I'm talking about earlier on, Steve, they make. They're not dieting. They haven't changed their lifestyle. And then they get just really, really bad sensations. So there's definitely a couple that you should avoid like the plague. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast of informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.